Welcome, everybody. This is Nahid Kazaza, Programming Director for ICF Orange County, and I have with me David Cory. I'm so excited to have David talk to us about emotional intelligence with coaching. Let me tell you before we get started a little bit about David. David has a Bachelor's of Education and a Master's and a coaching certification, CPCC. He's a leadership development coach, trainer, and consultant, known for his expertise in applying the concept of emotional intelligence to individual and organizational performance improvement. David founded one of the first companies in Canada to focus on the development of leadership based on emotional intelligence. The Emotional Intelligence Training Company celebrates its 22nd anniversary this year and certifies more people to use the EQI 2.0 in North America than any other company. In the course of his work, David's been an invited guest of the Sultan of Brunei, worked under armed guard in Nigeria, been kicked out of restricted area in Saudi Arabia, chased by an elephant in Zambia, and sang for royalty in Malaysia. David's company completed the design of an emotional intelligence skills development course for an entire nation. This was a first in the world. The course is currently being delivered through a train-the-trainer model to the citizens of Botswana. So I want to welcome everybody to our session today. And David, you've already got a thanks in the chat box for being here. So we're all really excited to hear from you, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Nahid. It's wonderful to be here, and I'm coming to you from beautiful Vancouver, BC, just straight up the coast from you. So welcome, everyone. I see the numbers are growing, so we'll have people joining us within the next few minutes, I'm sure. But we're here to talk about this interesting concept of emotional intelligence. And I remember when I first heard the term emotional intelligence, I thought, wow, that sounds a bit like an oxymoron. How can you be intelligent about emotions? And sure enough, when you start looking at the concept and start looking around online, you'll come across hundreds of thousands of web pages making reference to emotional intelligence, and a lot of people with a lot of models talking about emotional intelligence. So a little bit about how I first started, and by the way, if you want to use the chat box, please feel free to do that, to use the chat box at any time, to make comments, to ask questions. I'm happy to take your questions as we go ahead, and I've got about a 35, 40 minute presentation for you, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. So please just feel free to type in your questions into the chat box there. So I was a leadership trainer back in the 90s, and I was teaching leadership courses, the kind of leadership courses that some of you may remember, which have the beautiful wall charts and the beautiful participant manuals and the VHS video recorded scenarios that take place in workplaces, and we'd play the video up on the huge television that we'd have to have brought into the training room just for that purpose. We'd play the video and we talk about it and discuss how to tackle that leadership issue moving forward. And it was great training, and it was a lot of fun to do. But I knew that there were some managers coming into that training that were going to take those lessons away, and they were going to be able to use those and apply those and implement them back in the workplace, and others were going to struggle. And I didn't really know how I knew that, why I knew that. I just knew that some managers seemed to struggle with making contact with others, with social situations and social settings. And I didn't really know what that was until I went to a conference, and there was an individual making a presentation on emotional intelligence. And he happened to be the president of the publishing company which published the first scientific assessment for emotional intelligence. And so I listened to the presentation. I thought, wow, this seems to me as a trainer and someone educated as a teacher and someone who is familiar with education to be a foundational set of skills. So if we could take human skills and break them down into their most basic building blocks, that's what this framework seemed to me to be. And so I thought, wow, I want to learn more about this, and I want to see how I can incorporate that into leadership training and design my own leadership training. And so that's what I did. And that was in 1997 when I met this gentleman. His name is Dr. Steven Stein. He wrote an orange book, which some of you may be familiar with, called The EQ Edge, Emotional Intelligence and Your Success. The assessment tool, it was the Emotional Quotient Inventory. And I partnered with Steven Stein immediately after that conference, and I've been offering coaches the EQI certification course ever since, in addition to the other customized design work that we do for companies. So we've been using this assessment tool for 22 years in our coaching work and in our training work, and I'm going to talk with you about it today. So why the big interest in emotional intelligence? Well, the reason happens to be because this is how our brain works. Our brains do not process logic and rationality in a vacuum. We process every perception through an emotional lens. And so we walk into a room, we take in a scenario, and the very first thing that our brains do is tell us whether this situation, this set of circumstances is a threat to us, or it is not a threat to us. And then we go from there. Do we like this situation scenario? Do we feel comfortable, etc.? And so, again, in order to use logic, we have to be motivated to use logic. And motivation is an emotion. And so, again, this is one of the key messages from some of the training that we do, and that is that emotion, we swim in a sea of emotions. Emotions have everything to do with everything we do, and we don't necessarily think that's the case. In fact, emotions have a bit of a bad reputation in society. People think they can leave emotions out of it, and if you've heard that phrase, you know what I'm talking about. And I think the interest is not allowing emotions to sway a decision, or not to make a decision based on purely on emotion, but to couple that with logic and reason, and to make the best decision you can make. And it's one of the reasons that we like the model that the EQI is based on, because it includes how emotion affects our logic and our rationality and our decision making. And so we'll take a look at that as well. So many of you have been exposed to other models, you've taken other courses in emotional intelligence, I'm sure, and so love to hear some of those courses. If you want to, feel free to type them in the chat box. I'd love to hear some of those other models. If you want to type those in the chat box, please feel free to do that. And there's a lot of emotional stuff going on in the world right now. And we don't want to ignore that either. We want to acknowledge that. And certainly, in Canada, as well as other parts of the world, what's happened in the U.S. In terms of the protests and more specifically the anti-Black racism protests, and the fact that the brutal murder of George Floyd has affected all of us, and so it's really important to feel those feelings, and to be able to express those feelings. And Aristotle wrote about emotional intelligence back in somewhere around 300 BC, and he said that to be angry is easy, but to be angry with the right person at the right time, in the right amount, in the right way, that's hard and that's difficult. And that's emotional intelligence. That's being intelligent about emotions. People ask me, what is your definition of emotional intelligence? And it quite simply is being intelligent about emotions. Someone writes, there are a lot of underlying EI principles that we cover through nonviolent crisis intervention, de-escalation. Absolutely. This is fascinating. Absolutely. The fact that we have, and again, as a society, we have largely tried to ignore, avoid, and deny emotions, and that we're so bad at it as a society. This is fascinating. And this is the way we operate, we human beings. We are emotional and social beings. And so we should be more emotionally intelligent. Okay, so lots of models out there. As you know, again, the model that is the basis for the first scientifically validated assessment for emotional intelligence is the one that we're going to take a look at and do a bit of a dive into. So let's look at it. Thinking about you as coaches, you as family members, as community members, as members of your towns and municipalities, how can we be more intelligent about emotions? So we take a look at this model. This is the model of the emotional quotient inventory version 2.0. It was a bit different prior to 2011, and it was radically updated in 2011. And we've got this concept of emotional intelligence at the center, and then we have 15 discrete EQ competencies divided up into 5 categories. And we're going to just take a look at the 5 categories here quickly. Now, if you look at all the models of emotional intelligence out there, they largely fall into 2 categories. So one category, and the category where the model that was theoretically conceptualized by the individuals who get credit for coining the term emotional intelligence, that is Jack Mayer and Peter Salovey, their model is more a model of how the brain processes emotions and emotional information. It is, as they hypothesize, it is likely more that it is determined by your genetics, and so you inherit from your parents a capacity for emotions and for processing emotions and emotional information. Whereas other models out there, most other models, are a model of skills and competencies which are related to how we use the emotional intelligence that we have, and the EQI model is no different. The EQI model was originally published by Multi Health Systems out of Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and that's the company that is our supplier company, and we teach this certification course on license with. But let's take a look at this model now and understand a bit more about it and how it can help us as coaches and how it can help our coaching clients. So the first category of skills is what we call the self-perception area. And you can see that in the model at 12 o'clock there. The self-perception competencies include self-regard. How do you regard yourself? Self-actualization. What activities or pursuits do you involve yourself in? And then this idea that we have this incredible under the surface world, which is all of our emotions, and whether we're aware of those, whether we incorporate those into our thinking and our actions or not. So let's take a look at self-perception. So, when I think about when many of these competencies were developed, of course, they were developed in our early childhood. And so I've got this image of this young individual who seems to be quite a happy young lad, and you can imagine what his parents tell him. You're awesome. You can do anything you want. You're great the way you are. And so I sometimes imagine this little guy goes out into the world, and he encounters some of maybe the mean-spirited people, mean-spirited children that may not appreciate how he looks and how he dresses and the smile or the enthusiasm with which he enters the world. And just like the boat was not made to sit in the harbor, it was made to go out on the open sea. We human beings are no different. And so, how do we process the messages that get sent to us when we enter out into the world. We leave our family and go out into our world. And so, you know, this little guy might come home at the end of his first day at kindergarten or school or wherever, and say, you know, Mom, Dad, why do I have to wear this collar, this shirt with this collar? And, you know, the kids told me that it was stupid and I should actually undo my top button. And they said, well, you know, why are you wearing a shirt like that anyway? You should be wearing a t-shirt, because all of us kids, we wear t-shirts. And so he's saying, and you know, Mom, Dad, why do I have to have my hair so short? So again, we have to find ways of processing this information that the world gives us, which may be different than the imagery that comes from our parents. And certainly when we're thinking about racism and visible minorities, you know, who do we see in pop culture and the media, and what is that portrayal? And is there a wide range of portrayals of different roles for that where we see ourselves, that supports our self-regard as healthy and confidence building? And so ultimately we need to sort of have the ability to know ourselves and sort of know how we operate emotionally, understand our emotions, you know, what sorts of things are hot buttons for us, and what sorts of things trigger us, and so and then why is that? Because certainly, you know, lots of great books on emotions and how they're made, and you know, how they do what they do, but really they are biochemical reactions, and they are a response system, like a sixth sense, that if we pay attention to it, can give us data about our environment. And so we need to learn more about that and pay more attention to that to see what that data is providing us by way of information about our circumstances, so that we can make good decisions moving forward. So the part of this self-perception area is knowing ourselves, accepting ourselves, having self-confidence, having the ability to have bigger goals, to do what we love, and to feel fulfilled and self-assured. So all of that is part of self-perception. So if we move along in the model from self-perception, and if you can also think about this in developmental terms, as infants, you know, we don't even necessarily know that those fingers that are waving over our eyes when we're lying in our cradle are us, until somehow we realize that it is us. And that's at the beginning of our self-perception. Then we may express ourselves. We scream, we cry, and trying to get my PowerPoint there. Whoops. Let's go back one. Let's talk about this for a moment first. This is an image that we frequently use in our training sessions to talk about us human beings, that there is this above the surface world, there's what is tangible, what is visible, there's our body language and our facial expressions, and then there's this incredible seemingly unlimited beneath the surface world where our emotions live, that's all of our emotional baggage, all of the experiences that we've ever had, the things we've seen, the things we've done. They're all there in terms of memories and emotions, and we generally don't necessarily share those unless we feel like we trust someone. And so we build relationships of trust by sharing more and more of what is beneath our surface through becoming vulnerable. We'll talk about that in a few moments when we talk about the interpersonal realm of emotional intelligence. So again, as infants, we may scream and cry, which is the expression part. of emotions. And so, knowing and understanding them and how they affect us is one thing. And then being able to express those, express our feelings, wants, needs, and opinions freely to the right people at the right time. Again, going back to what Aristotle said, that's being intelligent about emotions. And then the evidence for that, and we frequently have managers asking us in our coaching, why do I have to share my emotions with my employees? And of course, the reason is that we don't trust what we don't know. And unless you become known to others, unless you let others get to know you, that's the foundation for trust and for great relationships with others. And so we talk about self-perception. This is about having a voice. This is about finding your voice. This is about using your voice. And of course, that's come up a lot in the news in the past while. And one of the most powerful signs that moved me in watching the protests was a sign that said "silence equals violence," and that's when when it really hit me that to stay silent and not talk about anti-Black racism and visible minority oppression is not acceptable any longer, and it's probably one of the good things to come out of a very bad situation is that more of us are talking about these issues now than ever before, and again, we routinely hold sessions for our alumni, and we've had some very emotional sessions lately, just talking about what the recent events in the news and going on in our cities across North America, how those have affected us. And people were able to express, and it was a space that was held as we coaches do, hold space for others to emotionally express, and it was an important one for many people, and that was the feedback that we got, was that here we are, trying to make sense, trying to understand, trying to learn, trying to be open, trying to actually do something instead of staying silent, staying quiet about these issues. So again, others get to know you, they can begin to trust you, and create those trusting relationships that are critical and important for leaders in every situation. So this is the self-perception part. So we start with self, but then we don't end with self. We include others. And here's where others come in the interpersonal realm of this model. And we've got these wonderful skills here, skills of empathy, skills of social responsibility, and these are important and critical, and skills of actually building relationships with others, knowing that the root word of relationship is relate. And unless we're relating, we're actually sharing from what's beneath our surface. We're talking about things that matter. We're talking about things that are meaningful, not just the small talk and the weather. And then again, what we talk about in workplace is the budgeting, the funding, the project timelines, etc. These are important, but they're not what's really meaningful. What I really want to know is how you feel about the budget. So I'm watching to see what your facial expression and your body language is telling me about that under the surface world. And when we develop our skills, I don't have to guess. I'm not assuming anymore. I actually know because you've told me. So again, the result of effective relationships is trust. And of course, there's been a lot of trust damaged in relationships between different groups of people, different individuals, and we have to build back that trust. We have to learn more about it. We have to be, as a society, more emotionally intelligent in order to build back trust. And for workplaces, for companies, for organizations, loyalty, commitment becomes important. We don't want to spend time, money, effort, energy in attracting top talent, only to lose them to another organization that has figured these things out, how to engage employees, how to establish connection, how to improve and create greater understanding between people, ultimately to have effective teamwork for organizations. So this is the interpersonal realm of this model of emotional intelligence. And then, of course, we want to talk about how emotions affect rationality. And that's here in this this particular realm of this model that we call decision making. Decision making consists of 3 EQ competencies, one of which is problem solving. And it's not whether you can do math, and it's not whether you're a good logical decision maker. That's not what we're interested in. We're interested in whether you can minimize or reduce unconscious bias. We're interested in whether you can decrease the role that procrastination has for so many of us. We're interested in whether you can minimize or reduce worry, avoidance, all of these emotional aspects of problem solving that come into play. And so this is all about one's ability to acknowledge and incorporate emotions into decision making and understand the impact of emotions versus, again, as we mentioned, leaving emotions out of it. So evidence for people who do this well, they come up with excellent solutions. They are able to consider all options while minimizing unconscious bias. And of course, this whole area of unconscious or implicit bias has a lot to do with race relations and racial inequality. And so it's important for all of us to learn more about how this affects our logic and our rationality. And of course, those of you who know about unconscious bias, you know that this is a natural occurrence. Our brains take shortcuts. They want to be efficient, and they do that. And so we need to be mindful. At mindfulness, and there are many very highly related concepts and constructs related to emotional intelligence. One of which is mindfulness, which is about tapping into that awareness of the moment and how our emotions are entering in, and being more aware of things like conformity bias and affinity bias, and the many ways that we can make cognitive errors if we don't understand better how our brains work. I typed in cognitive errors, you can do this too, into Wikipedia one time, and there's a page in Wikipedia with 117 cognitive errors, all of which are highly related to unconscious or implicit bias. So we are biased. It's just understanding more about that bias. It's about understanding the need for diversity and inclusion. How are we going to include different perspectives, different people of different backgrounds, people of different country cultures, ethnic cultures, etc. And how can we learn from each other and use a whole lot more empathy in order to really listen and hear others. And so I hope you see the relation with coaching. I hope you see how it's so critical and important that we coaches know more about our own EQ, and that we understand more about how to help our clients to develop their EQ. Once again, this idea of unnecessary delays. That's what happens when we worry, when we avoid tackling issues, etc. Okay, so that's the decision-making realm, and then our final realm is the whole realm of stress management. And the importance of stress management is that stress is necessary for us human beings. We need stress in order to do things, and you know this as well, and you've probably seen this curve before. This is the Yerkes-Dodson stress curve, or sometimes called the Yerkes-Dodson law. It was created in 1908 by Yerkes and Dodson, wanting to understand more about the relationship between stress and performance. We use this in our training sessions, and and help managers to understand that if there's too little stress, of course, there's an inactivity related to that. People are laid back. And we all think that we want this. And we do. We want it. We need it for short periods of time to recharge and rejuvenate. And so we take those opportunities to relax and maybe do nothing for a time. But then there comes a time when we get bored. We don't want to do nothing anymore, and we actually want to be involved in something meaningful. So that's where the optimum stress area is, and it's important for you to know where you are on this curve and to relate with it. Now, I don't see any. I don't see any questions coming in, but that could be because I don't have my settings correct. But if there are questions, comments, again, use that chat box, type them in. Let me know where you are on the stress curve. Some of you may be in that orange zone, the exhaustion zone, and certainly when I've talked to many people who are active in the various protests and that are going around, that's a frequent response is exhaustion. I'm just tired. And so it's important to understand what that's all about and what those other emotions are that are part of that before we slide down the slippery slope into anxiety, panic, anger, breakdown. So some of the EQ competencies that are in this realm are things like flexibility. How flexible are you? And of course, the more that you're able to bend and adapt to forces that are beyond your control, the less that you're going to be stressed out by things. And so certainly we've all used this kind of approach with our clients. I remember one day an executive assistant called me and said, what are you doing right now? And I knew who this executive assistant was. And I said, not much. Why? And she said, can you get down here right now? And she wondered if I could come downtown to this executive's office. And I came down, and he looked like he hadn't slept in a couple of days. And I said, what's going on? And he told me, and I said, okay, so what can you control and what can you not control? And just by putting the various aspects of what was stressing him out into those two columns, he was able to breathe a bit easier. So these things happen where we feel like perhaps we can control many things that are actually out of our control. And it reminds me of the serenity prayer, which you probably all know, which is a critical and important piece of being able to manage stress. And that is, it's about having the serenity to accept what you cannot change, the courage to change the things you can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And so we can remind our clients of the serenity prayer to help them to be emotionally intelligent when it comes to stress. Other aspects of stress management are stress tolerance. That is, what are the practical tactics that you can take to deal with stress and cope with stress in an active way. And then finally, there's optimism. Optimism is sometimes seen as a trait or a relatively static characteristic, or even genetically predetermined. You either are optimistic or you are not optimistic. However, Martin Seligman, and many of you have probably heard that name, Martin Seligman is considered to be the father of positive psychology. He wrote that wonderful book called Learned Optimism, where he actually broke down the ability to have a particular outlook and looked at various aspects of that. And hypothesized that you can actually learn to be more optimistic. And in this way, you will be able to tolerate you'll be able to manage the stress that you experience in a better way. And again, for leaders, we sometimes hear from leaders that they're neither optimists nor pessimists. They are realists, and say, well, it's good to be a realist. However, it's not very inspiring. And if part of leadership is to inspire others, to demonstrate the passion that you have for your work, then that optimistic attitude, that can do, let's focus on what's great about this project versus all of the risks. That's the leader that is going to engage me, and who's going to get the best work from me. So of course, these things play out in this way. Now, you're probably wondering, can you measure these things? And the answer is we try to measure these things using the emotional quotient inventory. And if you take the emotional quotient inventory, you'll be asked to respond using a Likert scale to 133 different statements that relate to the model that we just looked at. And then you get a report. You get a highly detailed report with suggested strategies for development. And one of those pages looks like this. So here we've got this page from an EQI of an individual who was a coaching client of mine. And let's just take a quick look at it. This is a leadership report. You can tell by the gold bars, which represent the top 50% of a representative sample of a group of high-performing leaders. So it's kind of like the target zone that we want to get to, and there's lots of empirical reasons for that are stated throughout the report. But I just want to draw your attention to some of these areas here. So there may be an assumption that higher is better. Well, higher is not always better. Actually, we'd like to see a balance between some of these things in order for the most effective application of these by anyone. We happen to use it for leadership development. That's our company's thing, the Emotional Intelligence Training Company. We design and develop leadership training for organizations. And so that's our focus is taking managers who generally get there because of their technical competence, as you know, and we help them to be better leaders, better able to know themselves and to know others and connect with others for better relationships. And so what I want to show you here is that this individual has a very high score in emotional expression. So you look at this high score in emotional expression, the mean is 100, standard deviation is 15. So anything that's sort of above 115 is considered to be it is considered that this person uses this fairly effectively, but it might not always be the case. So we have to actually enter into the debrief conversation, which is a bit like a coaching session, and sort of explore more and understand more about how these various areas are working for people or not working for people. And this individual has this high score in emotional expression, suggesting that he is very emotionally expressive. Then we look down to the EQ competency that would be a good balancer. Imagine someone who is for whom it is very easy to emotionally express. You might want that person to have a bit of a regulator, a bit of a way of not expressing every emotion to everyone all the time. And that regulator is impulse control. So we look at this individual's impulse control, and it is at 72, quite low, almost 2 standard deviations below the mean. So now we have a potential issue. In fact, what this issue looked like in the workplace was this individual was sharing far too much with far too many people. Okay, so we've got, so someone says, I'm lost. Okay, so can I get a bit more information about where you're lost? So we took a look at I don't see impulse control. Oh, I'm hoping that you're looking at the slide, the PowerPoint slide, which is a bunch of bar graphs on the page. Okay, good. Okay. So we looked at the wheel model with the 5 composite areas, and we're looking in the decision-making composite on this page, and there's the impulse control score is this little green bar, which has the score of 72. Okay, so I've got a raised hand from Susan. Susan, you want to unmute yourself and just ask your question? Or just type your question into the chat box. Okay, don't see a green bar. Okay, what's going on here now? It is possible that, okay, we're following now? Okay, good, good. It's the problem with webinars, you know, it's in a meeting format, you can kind of see people's faces, and it's, there's something really nice about that. But in a webinar, I'm just assuming that you're all seeing what, you know, the PowerPoint slide that I'm seeing. Okay, so we've got this PowerPoint slide up right now, which has all these bars on it, and all the bars are a graphic representation of this individual's scores in the 15 EQ competencies of this model, divided up into 5 composite areas or 5 categories of skills. So we're just talking about this individual's balance of the various EQ competencies and what the issue is. So this individual shares far too much with far too many people and does not use his impulse control to guard against the appropriate sharing of his emotions. And he was making some progress in gaining awareness of this in our coaching sessions. And unfortunately, what happened with this individual was that this organization let him go. And it was really sort of a not good time. It was over Christmas, and you know, we went off on the December holidays, and I came back, and he was no longer with the company. So okay, the sharing part, I see the slide, but where's the sharing part? So the sharing is emotional expression. So that score is 121. If you just look up to the self-expression composite, there's the emotional expression subscale, we sometimes call them, at 121. So indicating that he has no trouble sharing his emotions, but it's just about whether it's an appropriate sharing for building effective relationships or not. Does that make sense? Okay, so I am not seeing any. Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you, Michael. We've got a yes from Michael. Yeah, so please feel free to type in your questions, comments as they come to you. What can I tell you more about? What can I help you? What have I said that is contentious, or it does, but the words you're using aren't on the screen? Oh dear, there's no words on the screen. That is very odd. Let me just try one thing, just out of curiosity. Let me stop the share and try that again. Let's try sharing the screen again. And how about now? Oh, use a cursor to point at the bars. Yeah, I could certainly do that. Okay, we've got David. You said emotions are genetic. If we're talking about emotional intelligence and thinking about how we develop or how we have the emotional intelligence we have, there is a portion which is nature and a portion which is nurture, and so really in terms of looking at some of the different models, that is a differentiating factor. So for example, the Mayer-Salovey model is more a model of nature. So their original theoretical conceptualization was that like you know, IQ, our measure of our ability to learn, recall, etc. There's a little bit more of a genetic predisposition there, whereas this model is more a model of what's learned. So this is a model of nurture, and it's very helpful to know what we've learned and what we haven't learned, and what we need to unlearn and what we need to relearn. And so this model helps us with that. Oh, okay. So, so explain the yellow bar again. Sure. Yeah, the yellow bar over here, which is over top of the colored bars, that is a in a way, it was intended to be a target range for leaders. Because, as you know, leaders are so important in the effective functioning of an organization and impact on so many people, their EQ is that much more important and critical for effective leadership. And so what the company did that created this report was they gave the EQI to a group of 220 high-performing leaders. And they know they're high performing from other measures and looked at the top 50% of their range of scores and plotted that on this little bar graph. So if we look at the range, in some cases, so in effect, there's two comparisons here. One comparison is with a representative sample of the population, and that's the standard score numbers, and then where the mean is 100, and then there's the comparison with the high performing leaders, so that is there as well. In some cases, the score of the individual is right around the mean, the population mean, which indicates no initial issues with that particular score, but there may be a gap between that and the leadership bar range. How does this model compare with the Daniel Goleman model of emotional intelligence? Sure, yeah. As you probably know, Daniel Goleman is one of the most famous names associated with emotional intelligence, and he wrote that wonderful book in 1995 called Emotional Intelligence, Why It Can Matter More Than IQ. He did a literature review of all the researchers who were doing research in the area, including Dr. Reuven Bar-On, who created the EQI, and then he came up with his own model in partnership with, at the time, the Hay Group, which is now, of course, the Korn Ferry Hay Group. And so they've got their four-dimensional model, or four composite areas of EQ skills, and they've got their own skills, and they have their own assessment tool, which is, to my knowledge, only available as a 360, which is going to limit its use. So you only use that with the top of the organization. And it's called the Emotional and Social Competency Index, I think, or indicator, the ESCI. Certainly it's a very popular tool that exists out there. Paolo, for us, as you mentioned about flexibility, can be possible that high IQ individuals have more difficult to control their EI. It's a very common question that we get, Paolo, and the answer is no. In fact, it's a bit of a pet peeve of mine that these two constructs have fallen into the binary. So, we talk about people who have high IQs and low EQs, and it actually is overlooking the fact that our brains process emotions and logic and rationality at the same time. So really, there's one intelligence, and it happens to involve emotions, versus this IQ EQ binary, and we don't have data to show that people with high IQs have more difficult time controlling their emotions. It's not the case. But we all know people who are in that situation where they may be very technically competent and brilliant within their technical area of expertise, and yet they may struggle socially, etc. And that is one of the motivating factors that drew Dr. Reuven Bar-On into this study in the early 80s. Okay, good question in the Q&A box. I'm just going to go there because I can't see the Q&A box at the moment. Take a look at that. And it is, with everything that's going on right now, the COVID, protests, is there a possibility of skewed results just due to circumstances if someone takes the assessment during this time? It's a great question, Ronan. Thank you so much for that question. And the answer is that the EQI is a snapshot in time, and so it does reflect what's happening in your life at the moment. And then if we look at how those various life circumstances affect you in this moment, we have to go back and look at the various. We have to look at the various. Factors that go into your Likert response to a statement. So the statement may be, "I am in touch with my emotions," and so if the protests and other things are going on, you may feel that those emotions are a bit more at the surface for you, or that those are a bit more. Those are a bit more up here, and you may be more aware of that, and so you may in fact say that you are more aware of your emotions than you would otherwise. What I've done, and I encourage people in our CERT courses to do, is to go through the statements and ask yourself, what would have to be different for me to give a different response? So the EQI is trying to understand a bit of a baseline of where your EQ is at over the course of time, and sort of how you operate in general. But again, you may operate slightly differently depending on what's going on. We sometimes see that after someone has been working under a very challenging manager for a long period of time, their self-regard suffers as a result. So in terms of them feeling confident, that may be a little bit lower. And then we find that in times when people just have a new job role, they may also be feeling a bit less confident in that job role when they're new in the job role. And of course, and we sometimes find that people who are in the wrong job feel a bit lower on self-actualization, because it's actually not that fulfilling for them. It doesn't provide them with that same level of meaning and purpose. And so these things do affect. It is a snapshot in time, and we have to take that into consideration and understand that better. This is why the debrief is so critical and important. The EQI is a level B psychometric, and so every report must have a one-to-one debrief where you really dig down deep into understanding the scores as to whether they're accurate. And if they're accurate, then what do we want to do about that? Are these things where you could see the benefits of improving? And if you were to improve, how might you go about that? Okay, so what other questions do you have? Type them into the chat box. I've got that open. I could have the Q&A box open on my desktop as well. It just takes a bit more doing here. I'm going to put my last slide up here. If you do want to contact me for any reason, you've got my email address there, my direct line. Feel free to use that. Yeah, let's hear what questions you have. What do you find interesting about what I'm talking about or what I'm saying here now? What is a great result you've seen with yourself or a client as a result of improving their EQ? Great question. Thank you, Nanor. And the answer has to be this one guy that comes to mind whenever I get this question. And he was he was trained in the British military, and so he kind of brought the same kind of militaristic type of approach to his leadership. And you know, he was a guy who did not understand or see social relationships in the workplace as being critical or important, and he he just didn't believe in socializing with others. He was very much about being on task, and the more we looked at his EQ scores, and the more we looked at particularly the EQ, the wonderful thing about the EQI is it's also available as a 360. So looking at his EQ 360 results, he was not pleased that people saw him the way that they saw him, and he wanted to change. And we laugh about that now, a year later, after him putting in a lot of effort and work. But really, one of the things that needed to change was his beliefs. his beliefs about the workplace, what the workplace was about, and looking at the beliefs of the new generations coming in, that he was he was accountable for their performance, responsible for leading them, and he needed to understand that they saw the workplace in a different way. They wanted different things from a leader that maybe he wanted from his military background. And so just shifting his beliefs and understanding more about how to improve his skill level in these various areas was incredibly transformative for him. And he told me stories about his family, with his kids. It was a huge transformation. And he calls himself the poster boy for emotional intelligence in this large company. So that's just one client. We've got lots of stories about that. Probably the funniest feedback that we ever got was from a physician whose wife asked him what he had been prescribing himself because he was so different at home with his family. And it was a choice that he made based on learning about EQ and learning that there was a different way to show up in the world and go against cultural beliefs, other kinds of societal beliefs about keeping your emotions inside, stuffing them down, not sharing, etc. All right, so okay, so I've got a question from Lori. I really want to understand this. This is anger depression class you're creating. Information is perfect timing for me. Excellent. Yeah. And if you want to be in touch to talk more about any of these things, please feel free. It's a passion of mine. I hope you get that. I love this stuff. I think it has the possibility to change the world. And of course, the response to when clients say emotional intelligence is fluffy and new age nonsense is to educate them and help them understand that actually being intelligent about emotions is a survival skill. In the absence of people skilled in emotional intelligence, what we have is mistrust, we have misunderstanding, we have dysfunctional relationships, we have anger, we have hate, we have intolerance, we have violence, and we have war as a result of people being unskilled. So this move to defund the police, I think it's fantastic, and I'm all for it. What we need are people educated in empathy, people who can walk into various situations, not with guns drawn, but with empathy, trying to understand what's happening in the situation so they can diffuse it without the use of violence, because that's not their job. If it escalates to the point, then of course the police are necessary. We need them to do certain things, but we don't need them to go into every situation with guns drawn. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much, David. Really,
Thanks,
really
Naheed.
appreciate it. I do see you have one more question here, and I'll give you a minute to answer it, but we're going to make that the last question.
Great.
So go ahead.
Okay, so share a perspective about emotions and humility and where they intersect. Absolutely. So humility frequently comes up when we talk about self-regard. And, you want to acknowledge what you do well. You want to feel good about yourself. You want to appreciate what you can offer and what you bring to the table. But we also want you to have a level of openness to others, a level of not thinking that you're a different breed apart from the rest of us human beings. You are not a different species. You're still one of us. We're all on this road together. When you can acknowledge that and couple that self-regard with social responsibility, with the ability to give back and seeing that you have contributions to make. And those wonderful phrases that have come up as a result of COVID-19, we're all in this together. Understanding that and taking your role there. It also has a lot to do with the idea of a growth mindset. That book, Mindset by Carol Dweck, wonderful, and has a lot to do with humility and self-regard and finding the right balance. All of these things are about balance. And if we can find the right balance, we can be effective at whatever it is we turn our mind to. Thanks, Naheed.
Thanks so much, David. I love how animated we got towards the end, especially with people asking questions. And I wish we had a little bit more time for questions and interaction. But I just want to say, I do have a couple of coach friends that use this tool, that swear by it. And if any of you are interested in learning about it and getting certified on it, The information's on your screen, so you can just do a quick screen capture and reach David personally to get some follow-up on it. Thank you again so much, David. That was really, really useful information, especially in these times. I want to just, before we close off, just let you guys know what we have coming up here. We have our virtual chapter meeting on June 18th. That's not this Thursday, but a week from Thursday, with Dan Radecki, and he's going to be talking about overcoming panic pandemic, managing the emotional brain during challenging times. So you can see that this kind of ties right in to what we've been talking about here. And you'll notice that in our upcoming events, we are moving more towards managing emotions and developing our coaching skills around that. On July 7th, we have an MCC coming in. I talked to her personally. She's amazing, the art and science of coaching, and she's going to actually do coaching with us in our session. We're going to increase it to 90 minutes so we can do a full debrief after she coaches somebody for 30 minutes, and you'll get to watch her coach somebody online. And I think getting a chance to watch masterful coaching is really, really important. And then we also have another master coach coming in on July 16th to talk to us about mastering the 30-minute coaching session. So getting your coaching lasered and honed. So we have a lot of really, really great things coming up. And then after that, we're going to be talking about coaching for agility. Again, the secret sauce for success in a disrupted world. So we're going to be bringing the skill set of coaching, but also the skill set of coaching in this emotional world. And it lines right up with, I think, this tool as a great baseline in terms of really paying attention to emotional intelligence. So thanks again, David. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us, and we'll see you again on the next one. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks, Nahid. Thanks, everyone. Bye for now.